Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we take a deep dive into compelling nonfiction that reshapes our understanding of history. Today we're dissecting Karl-Heinz Frieser's groundbreaking work, The Blitzkrieg Legend, the 1940 campaign in the West.
Right. And when most of us picture 1940, the German conquest of France, we see this image of an unstoppable, meticulously planned blitzkrieg just rolling over everything.
Exactly, this terrifying efficiency. But what if that popular image is, well, more legend than actual fact?
That's the core of Frieser's argument. He really digs into the archives and says, look, this wasn't some perfectly executed master plan.
So if it wasn't the smooth operation we imagine, what was it then? You're saying Frieser found it was chaotic.
Yeah, chaotic, improvised, a success, yes, but fueled by maybe a few key tactical innovations, definitely surprising German military efficiency, and crucially, a series of pretty staggering Allied mistakes. Almost unbelievable, some of them.
Okay, so our deep dive today is going to unpack that. We'll look at the unplanned nature of this blitzkrieg, the importance of the Battle of Sedan, those big differences in military thinking, and maybe the consequences nobody saw coming, like Dunkirk.
Exactly, because the standard story, is Hitler's grand vision, all planned out for world domination. But Frieser says, hold on, the archives tell a very different story.
Different how?
Well, the campaign in the West, it happened very differently from the initial plans, and Blitzkrieg itself. It wasn't some top-down strategic concept dreamed up by Hitler. It bubbled up from tactical necessity right there on the battlefield.
Tactical necessity, really. Not some grand strategy.
Yeah.
So where did the idea come from then, if not from the top brass?
Frieser traces it back further, actually, to World War I, to the German stormtroop tactics, the Stoßtrupp tactic.
The infiltration tactics designed to break the trench stalemate. Small units, bypassing strong points.
Exactly, trying to get back to mobile warfare. Now, some later writers, particularly Anglo-Saxon ones, they sort of blew up General von Hutier into the father of Blitzkrieg. But really, it started as a concept for, platoons and companies, small-scale stuff.
So not an overarching strategic plan for the whole army or the whole war?
Not at all. And historians like Timothy Mason and Hugh Strachan, they argue Blitzkrieg as this big strategic and economic concept just didn't exist pre-war. Strachan calls the successes a fatal combination of domestic policy compulsion, foreign policy accident, and extreme adventurousness on the part of Hitler. Basically, success made it look like a system after the fact.
Wow. Okay, so if it wasn't this grand strategy, what were the German generals thinking before the war? I mean, surely they had some plan.
Well, what's fascinating and maybe counterintuitive is that many German generals had learned from World War I. They didn't actually believe in quick knockout blows against enemies with potentially superior strength.
Really, they expected a long war.
Some definitely did. You have figures like Oberst Georg Thomas, head of the War Economy Staff, warning explicitly in 1937 against the illusion of a short war.
Okay.
And Grand Admiral Raeder, head of the Navy, he predicted more fortress warfare, like WWI. He stressed that victory would ultimately go to the side with more people and, crucially, more resources. He warned against pinning everything on one big operation.
Which makes sense because Germany was lacking in so many raw materials, wasn't it? Oil, rubber, nickel.
Critically so. A long war was, on paper, a terrible prospect for them. But Hitler, he was convinced Britain and France wouldn't react seriously to Poland. He underestimated them massively, thought France was weak, Britain wouldn't risk it.
So Germany stumbled into a major war of the West without a real, coherent strategy for winning it. No plan for a long conflict, no strategic bomber force to speak of, a navy nowhere near ready.
Pretty much. They were totally unprepared for a long haul against the British Empire, especially. The Navy hadn't even built up to the limits allowed by their own treaty with Britain from 1935. It's quite startling, really.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Then we get that weird period, the phony war, those 7 months after Poland fell. How did that play out?
Well, here's a paradox. That delay actually worked to Germany's advantage, militarily speaking. Everyone expected a quick follow-up, but the pause let the Wehrmacht rebuild ammunition stocks. Heavy mortar ammo went up 5-fold, get this, and really upgrade their tank force.
Right, you mentioned the tanks earlier. They shifted away from the light Panzer 6 and 2.
Massively. They boosted the numbers of the medium Panzer IIIs and IVs and the Czech tanks they'd captured. The Panzer III, the really crucial one for tank-on-tank fighting, went from maybe 150 to nearly 800. That's a huge jump in quality and punch.
Well, Fan says. they'd already mobilized most of their available manpower, hadn't they?
Essentially, yes. Their resources were largely tapped. Germany, because of the post-WWI restrictions, actually had this huge pool of untrained men, these white age classes, millions of them, ready to be called up.
So time wasn't actually on the Allies' side in the short term, despite their long-term potential.
Ironically, no. Frieser makes the point that the Allies, given Germany's focus on armament in width, meaning readiness for short campaigns, not a deep industrial base for a long war, probably should have attacked quickly themselves. Germany couldn't sustain a long conflict initially.
Okay, so Germany's been rearming, upgrading tanks.
Mhm.
What were their actual initial plans for attacking France and the Low Countries? Case Yellow, wasn't it?
Yes, Case Yellow. And the first versions, drafted by Halder, the Army Chief of Staff, they were pretty conventional. Basically, a rerun of the old Schlieffen Plan idea from World War I, hit hard through Belgium, the northern flank. Aiming for a big battle, maybe, but not necessarily the total strategic knockout we saw.
Pretty unimaginative, then.
You could say that, but then comes Erich von Manstein. He was Chief of Staff for Army Group A, positioned further south, and he develops this radical idea. The sickle cut, or Zielschnitt.
The thrust through the Ardennes.
Exactly. A massive armored punch right through the Ardennes forest, which the Allies thought was impassable for tanks, aiming straight for the Channel coast. The goal, cut off all the Allied armies rushing north into Belgium.
Bold. Did he get immediate support?
He found a key ally almost immediately in Heinz Guderian, the Panzer expert. By chance, they were billeted near each other in Koblenz, and they talked it through intensively. Guderian loved it.
But Halder, the Chief of Staff,
hated it. Halder was cautious. He resented Manstein's boldness and actually tried to get him out of the way, promoted him sideways to command a non-existent corps. Halder was worried Hitler, with his, penchant for risky moves, would latch on to this adventurous plan.
So Manstein had to fight the German high command as well.
He did. He was persistent. He actually went directly to Hitler during a conference and essentially demanded strong panzer forces or none at all for the Ardennes thrust. And Hitler, liking the boldness, eventually agreed. That decision to concentrate the tanks under 12th Army for Manstein's plan was absolutely crucial.
A real clash of personalities and ideas shaping the whole operation. So the plan shifts. The panzers go through the Ardennes. How did that actually unfold?
This was the moment Guderian's theories were put into practice on a massive scale. Panzer Group Kleist led the way. For the first time, the tank divisions operated almost completely independently, way ahead of the infantry. They were cut loose.
Not just spearheads for infantry anymore.
No, they were the operational fist, punching deep. But it wasn't smooth sailing. There was what Clausewitz called friction, reality biting back.
Like what?
Well, there's this example at Boudange in Belgium, a small Belgian defense post. Should have been overrun quickly, but due to a communications failure linked to a botched German airborne drop meant to deceive the Belgians, the defenders held out heroically for hours, causing unexpected delays.
So chaos, not just clockwork precision.
Absolutely. And other times, chaos worked for the Germans. Near Bourges, they managed to outflank the French defenders, and the French line, just as Frieser puts it, collapsed like a broken dam. Neufchâteau fell quickly after that.
And wasn't there an incident at Mouzaiv?
Yeah, a small German assault team basically stumbled through a gap left by a retreating French unit and caused a much wider withdrawal. It wasn't brilliant planning. It was exploiting a sudden, unexpected opportunity. Very messy, very dynamic.
Okay, let's flip to the French side. What was their thinking? You mentioned they thought the Ardennes were impassable.
That was a core fundamental belief, almost dogma, stemming from their WWI experience and a focus on static defense. The Ardennes are impenetrable for tanks, and also the Meuse cannot be crossed in force.
Which meant?
It meant they put their weakest troops, second-rate reservist divisions, in the Sedan sector, right where the main German blow would fall. They assumed they'd have days, maybe weeks, to move reserves up if anything happened there.
Even though their own intelligence apparently suspected an Ardennes attack.
Yes. French intelligence actually had multiple reports pointing to a German offensive through the Ardennes, even naming Sedan as early as May 1st. But the high command, stuck in its defensive doctrine, seemed unable or unwilling to believe it.
And this defensive mindset's affected training too, right? You mentioned that bizarre story about the anti-tank guns.
It's incredible. They prioritize building the Maginot Line bunkers over actual combat training for mobile warfare. The 55th Infantry Division at Sedan, mostly older reservists, just wasn't prepared. And yes, that incident where a lieutenant got 15 days arrest for ordering anti-tank practice, it speaks volumes about the resistance to adapting.
Just astounding. And their tanks. They had tanks? Good ones on paper, some argue?
They did have some powerful tanks, like the Sharp B-1 Bis, arguably better armed and armored than many German tanks at the time, but their philosophy was different. French tanks were seen as infantry support, slow, heavy, designed for methodical breakthroughs, not rapid, independent operational sweeps like the Panzers. Short-range, often one-man turrets, they were built for a different war.
And leadership style.
A huge difference. German commanders like Guderian and Rommel famously led from the front, often in command tanks or armored cars right where the action was. They could see, react, make decisions instantly. French generals, often far back in command bunkers, relying on telephone lines that frequently got cut, totally detached from the speed of events.
Which brings us to Sedan, May 13th, the decisive moment.
Absolutely, the hinge of the campaign. The Luftwaffe played a huge role here. They flew over 1,200 sorties, bombers, and Stuka dive bombers in a concentrated rolling raid over the French positions. It wasn't about massive physical destruction, but the psychological impact was shattering. Total panic among the French defenders.
The Stuka sirens.
Exactly, terror from the skies. And with German artillery often stuck in traffic jams in the Ardennes, the Luftwaffe essentially acted as their vertical artillery.
And the actual crossing of the Meuse River, how did they manage that against defended position?
This is maybe the most astonishing part. The actual breakthrough, the crossing itself, was achieved by just 3 small German assault teams. Engineers, infantry, using rubber boats. They didn't wait for heavy bridging equipment or massed forces. They just went, found weak spots, infiltrated, and pushed inland immediately.
3 small teams cracked the whole front.
Effectively, yes. They created the initial breach. And the casualties. Frieser highlights this. For Guderian's entire Panzer Corps, a huge formation, the losses on that decisive day at Sedan were about 120 killed and 400 wounded.
120 killed. To break a major river line defended by an army. Compared to the Somme, Verdun.
It's almost nothing. Hundreds of thousands died in WWI breakthrough battles that often gained only yards. Sedan achieved in hours, and the follow-up in days what took years in the previous war. It shows the devastating effectiveness of the new approach against an unprepared enemy.
How did the French even try to respond? Counterattacks.
They tried, but they were slow, poorly coordinated, often delayed until nightfall, losing crucial momentum, and plagued by panic and bad doctrine. General Flevigny, commanding the key armored reserve, instead of massing his tanks for a powerful counterpunch, he spread them out thinly in a defensive line. WWI thinking again.
Spread them out against concentrated panzers.
Exactly. It was disastrous. Plus, the Germans ran a successful deception operation near the town of Stone, south of Sedan. They made the French think a major attack was coming south, tying down France's best armored units there, while Guderian's main force was actually breaking out west towards the channel.
A feint. And Guderian himself wasn't exactly following orders to consolidate the bridgehead, was he?
Not at all. His superiors wanted him to halt and wait for infantry. Guderian basically ignored those orders and kept pushing west as fast as possible. That disobedience was critical to the sickle-cut success.
Which leads us straight to Dunkirk and the infamous halt order. Guderian's panzers are racing to the coast.
Yes, they're creating this huge pocket, trapping the British Expeditionary Force and the best French armies. They're days, maybe hours away from closing the trap completely near Dunkirk. But then the order comes from Hitler. Halt.
Why? Halder and the high command were nervous.
They were nervous, yes. They worried the panzers were overextended, their flanks vulnerable. They wanted the infantry to catch up and solidify the encirclement. Standard military prudence, perhaps.
But Hitler's motives might have been different. And Goering.
Definitely. Hitler himself seems to have had anxieties about losing the precious panzers. And Hermann Goering, head of the Luftwaffe, made a disastrous intervention. He promised Hitler his air force could annihilate the trapped Allied forces alone. He wanted the glory for the Luftwaffe, likely wanting to prevent the army generals from getting too much credit, too.
And Hitler bought it.
He did. He issued the halt order on May 17th, effectively giving the panzers a pause of crucial days. Officers on the ground, like von Tresco, were apparently furious, called it sheer madness.
A fatal mistake.
Absolutely fatal. Goering's Luftwaffe couldn't deliver. They were tired, facing stiffening resistance, and crucially, they ran into the RAF's Spitfires operating from bases just across the channel.
The Spitfires.
Yeah.
Superior fighters operating close to home.
Exactly. They could stay in the air longer, fly more missions. The Luftwaffe actually lost air superiority over the Dunkirk beaches and took significant losses. That pause and the air cover, however imperfect, allowed the Allies to organize the evacuation, Operation Dynamo.
Saving hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Hitler tried to spin this later, didn't he? Claiming he let the British go.
Yeah, the legend grew that he intentionally spared them, wanting to make peace, admiring the consanguineous English race, as he put it. Said he wanted to avoid a shameful defeat for them.
But Frieser says that's nonsense. A cover-up.
Completely. Frieser points to Hitler's own Directive Number 13 from May 24th, which explicitly orders the annihilation of the forces in the pocket. Letting them escape was a massive military blunder driven by a mix of high command caution, Hitler's anxieties, and Goering's ambition and incompetence. It wasn't generosity.
Losing that huge number of trained soldiers would have been catastrophic for Britain. Okay, so after Dunkirk, the campaign wasn't quite over, was it? Case read.
No, the second phase, Case Red, began in early June. The Germans turned south to finish off the rest of France. But the French, under General Weygand, had managed to scrape together a new defensive line along the Somme and Aise rivers.
The Weygand line. Did it hold?
Initially, it forced the Germans back into costly WWI-style frontal assaults, a chopping through phase, as Frieser calls it, with much heavier German casualties than in the first phase, but eventually German mobility and air power broke through again.
And Italy jumped in at the end.
Right at the end, yes. Mussolini, seeing France collapsing, declared war, hoping to grab some spoils, launched an offensive in the Alps, achieved almost nothing against determined French resistance, but famously, Mussolini felt he needed several thousand dead to justify a seat at the peace table.
Grim. So looking back at the whole campaign, an easy victory for Germany in the end, relatively speaking.
In terms of casualties compared to WWI, yes, unexpectedly easy. Around 49,000 German dead or missing, versus over 130,000 Allied, plus the huge numbers captured. Tank losses were also surprisingly low for the Germans, but that very ease bred overconfidence.
The idea that future campaigns, like against Russia, would also be easy victories.
Precisely. It created a dangerous illusion. Meanwhile, in France, the aftermath was bitter. The search for scapegoats began, leading to the Riom trials under the Vichy regime, blaming politicians, pacifism, supposed societal decadence.
The stab-in-the-back legend, French style?
Sort of, but historians like Marc Bloch argued forcefully against that. He blamed the French military command, their incapacity to think in terms of a new war, their detachment from reality.
And Frieser agrees with Bloch that it was primarily a military failure, not a societal one.
He does. He concludes the secret to German success wasn't some unique Nazi dynamism, but the long-term development of the German military machine itself. Citing military historian Martin von Crefeld, he talks about its extraordinary cohesion, morale, resilience, a perfectly functioning machinery built over centuries.
So the 1940 Blitzkrieg wasn't a pre-planned Nazi strategy.
No. More like an improvised tactical masterpiece. It married those old WWI storm troop principles with modern tanks and planes, brilliantly exploited Allied mistakes and doctrinal rigidity, and relied heavily on audacious, sometimes disobedient leadership on the ground. It was more chaos theory than careful planning.
A potent and ultimately legendary combination.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really clear that 1940 wasn't just a swift military campaign. It completely overturned how people thought about war.
Yeah, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How often are history's big turning points not about some grand design, but just this messy mix of chance, individual boldness, old ideas failing, maybe even deliberate lies like the Dunkirk story? The Blitzkrieg legend is powerful, but the real story Frieser tells is arguably far more fascinating. Makes you wonder what other historical moments that seem so clear-cut are actually hiding similar layers of chaos, improvisation, and sheer unexpected contingency.